Nearly 350 years ago from today, an everlasting example of the relationship between the Spanish Europeans and the Native American people went down, which created a pattern for the exploration and relations of the United States. This example is forever known as the Pueblo Revolt of 1680. The revolt was a plan conspired from tense relationships between the Spanish settlers and the native Pueblo Indians, where the natives triumphed in winning their freedom from Spain, only to tragically lose it as Spain reconquered the land once again. Before the Spanish even stepped a foot into the Pueblo territory, the native inhabitants had lived near the Four Corners of Mesa Verde nearly 1,400 years ago. The Pueblos are best known for their constructed cliff dwellings made of sandstone, mud, and water. Their religion consisted of myths that define the relationship between man, nature, plants, and animals. In their corner of the world, the Pueblo people prospered, but in the 1300s, they left Mesa Verde to travel south into New Mexico and Arizona. Almost 2 centuries following the Pueblos' move, Spanish exploration to the new land began in 1492 with Christopher Columbus to create the Spanish Empire and continued north into the mid-1500s to explore the home of the modern United States. Expeditions were led by Spanish explorer Francisco Vázquez de Coronado, who set out in search of the rumored 7 golden cities of Cibola. The expeditions traveled over vast plains with cows and fought thirst and tiredness. Whenever both the natives and the Spanish encountered, the natives received the Spanish peacefully, while the Spanish demanded supplies of food and clothing. Each group tolerated each other despite the language barrier. Coronado's expeditions never ended with heaps of gold, but the Spanish instead changed their direction and sought after conquest and the pacification of the natives. As the years flew by, Spanish settlers established Spanish colonies upon the Pueblo territory and grew in control of the southwest Pueblos. In every Pueblo, one could find a church and priest who had baptized thousands of natives. The Spanish saw their Indian neighbors as debased and undeserving of full citizenship. To the natives, the Spanish were powerful people with guns and horses. The entire Pueblo faith and religious practices were compromised, and the natives no longer had the freedom to do as they wished. Caves were destroyed, practices and rituals were suppressed, and the Pueblo religious leaders were imprisoned for speaking out. To add to that, the Spanish brought diseases that killed a third of the Pueblo population. Because of all this hardship, one man was brought to the belief that the ancient spirits were displeased and the foreigners had to leave. That man was named Pope. Pope was the shining triumph to the Pueblos in their dark cloud of tragedy. He was one of the 47 medicine men who were arrested, beaten, and sold into slavery. After being released, Pope headed to Taos to organize a rebellion. According to Indian recounts, Pope saw figures emit fire from themselves named Kadi, Talini, and Time. The figures told Pope to make a cord out of maguey fiber and tie knots into it to signify the number of days before the rebellion. Pope traveled to every village, informing the people to forget their differences and unite against Spain. Unfortunately for Pope, some tribes refused to participate, while some continued to support the Spanish. In order to convince the various tribes, Pope used bribery, promising that anyone who killed a number of Spaniards would get the same number of Pueblo women. He also promised economic relief and warned them that they must rebel or be destroyed. With a majority of the tribes on board, Pope's plan began, which involved cooperation and participation to destroy the churches, kill the priests, and the settlers. Once the Spanish were gone, the Pueblos believed that their gods would reward them with health and prosperity. And in addition to the Pueblo tribes, the surrounding tribes lent their support. The day was set. On August 11th, 1680, the Spanish were going down. To keep track of the days leading up to the revolt, young runners would secretly run a knotted cord to every pueblo, untying one knot with every passing day. The last knot would signify the rise against the Spanish. Unfortunately, 2 runners were captured at Tesuque days before the revolt and received torture to reveal the meaning of the knots. The Spanish quickly learned about the plans of the revolt, while a misunderstanding conspired between the Pueblo leaders, which led to some attacking a day early. Pope's perfect plan began to fall through as many Spanish settlers escaped death, but the revolt continued throughout the Pueblos as they drove out the Spanish. The Pueblo Revolt was a triumph for the Pueblo Indians. Throughout the entire revolt, the built-up passion from 140 years of submission and the determination to exterminate the Spanish burned intensely. Images of the Holy Christ, saints, and crosses were engulfed in flames. Temples fell to demolition and homes got plundered and robbed. The Indians dove into the water to wash away their baptismal names and holy oils. Spanish horses were stolen, the Spanish north got separated from the south, water was cut off, and the roads to Santa Fe were blocked so that no supply replenishment could get through. On August 13th, natives and refugees from the Santa Cruz Valley and the Cerrillos district invaded Santa Fe, demanding that the Spanish leave and free their Indian slaves. Although fatigued from the lack of water and fighting, Spanish refused and were determined to fight until death or conquest. On that day, nearly 500 Indian reinforcements joined the fight to overtake the armed settlers. In total, approximately 21 priests, 400 men, women, and children were killed. The revolt ended when the Spanish survivors were driven as far south as present-day El Paso, after 11 days of fighting. To many, the revolt was the single most successful act of resistance by Native Americans against the European invader, a true triumph of the Pueblos, especially after suffering from the tragedy of the Spanish colonization. Unfortunately, their freedom did not last long. The Pueblo Revolt of 1680 brought freedom to the Pueblo Indians after triumphing over the Spanish, but quickly transitioned into a tragedy due to numerous factors. The Spanish reconquest, taking place 12 years after the revolt, was the final factor as to how the Pueblos lost their triumphant freedom as a thriving, independent nation. The Spanish experienced success and defeat while exploring and colonizing the new America, but their passion for the original purpose allowed them to rebound from the Pueblo Revolt. The Spanish were determined to restore their land and have power over the Indians at any cost, which provided them with the strength and dedication to a victory in their reconquest. On the other hand, the Pueblos struggled in their corner of the world. Because of the evacuation of the Spanish, the tribes found themselves separated by hundreds of miles, and some Indians continued to support and encourage the Spanish and the reconquest. Due to raids from the Navajos and Apaches and a 7-year drought, the Pueblos suffered from a power struggle, which left them vulnerable to the Spanish. In addition to this, the previous Indian leader, Pope, had passed away and left the Indians without a leader. The Indian circumstances were not looking promising. When the inevitable Spanish stepped foot into the Pueblo territory in 1692, led by Spanish explorer Diego de Vergas, the natives held on to their grievances and did not accept the Spanish or the peace negotiations. It wasn't until they were threatened that their water would be cut off did the Pueblos begin to listen. The natives had once accepted the Spanish with peace and hospitality, but because both cultures clashed instead of cooperated, the Indians lost their trust with the Spanish and could not carry on peaceful agreements. Because of all the dissensions by the weak tribes and Spain's diplomatic approaches, the defensive barriers built by past hurts and the Spanish unconquerable dedication led to the tragic reconquest of the Indians. Although the Pueblo people fell under the Spanish reign once again, the Pueblo Revolt was not for nothing. The revolt is a prominent event that displays how cooperation and determination can conquer the greatest of obstacles. After the Spanish reconquest, relationships between both nations remained tense, but they also found a new respect and became more tolerant of each other. The Spanish and native Pueblos intermarried and could work alongside each other. Additionally, Pueblo Revolt introduced horses to all Native Americans. At the end of the revolt, the Spanish left behind teams of horses vulnerable to the Pueblo natives' ownership. For the Pueblos, they quickly learned how to ride the horses, but mainly valued them as a food or trading source. Over time, more and more Native American tribes of the plains built relationships with these horses. Horses became a prized possession and companion that allowed mobility and efficient strategies to hunting buffalo, allowing more tribes than just the Pueblo access to a new way of life. Though, perhaps most importantly, the revolt gave Spain more power and more land, which would then help shape the territory and relations of the United States. Spain continued to grow and gain more power over North America, giving them possession over more North American land. This laid the groundwork for interstate relations with the United States. During the American Revolution, Spain was an ally of France and against Britain, so they provided supplies for the American forces. Because of America's newfound freedom, the country expanded westward and obtained the eastern part of Colorado through the Louisiana Purchase, and later obtained the western part of the Rocky Mountain state after signing the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848 with Mexico, who had gained their independence from Spain in 1820. In 1876, Colorado was welcomed into the United States as the 38th state with its abundant natural resources that had once attracted the Pueblos hundreds of years before. Today, the descendants of the ancestral Pueblos continue to live south in New Mexico and Arizona, while the cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde National Park continue to be studied and excavated for more information. The triumphs and tragedies of the Pueblo Revolt occurred hundreds of years ago between two cultures that paved the way for the relationships between modern United States, Mexico, and Spain. The Pueblo Indians worked and gave their all to accomplish their goal of freedom against Spain, only to be under their control once again. Eventually, America moved in and Spain left, leaving Mexico an independent country. The United States triumphed in gaining new land, such as Colorado, and establishing relationships. Despite the good or the bad, our country and where we live in today would not be the same without the triumphs and tragedies of the Pueblo Revolt.